body and grinding down the center.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, Floyd Mayweather Jr. very recently had a lot to say about Canelo Alvarez. You could almost accuse Floyd of spending more time talking about Canelo than talking about his own fighter, Gervonta Davis, and what is his own fight this weekend against Isaac Cruz.
Who's that?
Floyd Mayweather, on how Canelo Alvarez has developed since they fought. He's the same fighter. Same fighter. It's crazy. Canelo in his prime, he'd have been a different fighter. When I fought him, he was in his prime. I was the best in my 20s. When I fought Canelo, I was almost 40.
Canelo wasn't in his prime when he fought Floyd.
Let's just get that right out of the way. Canelo Alvarez was not yet in his prime when he faced Floyd Mayweather Jr. Does that somehow take away from Floyd's victory? No, it doesn't. I've never attempted to diminish or explain away Floyd Mayweather's schooling of Canelo Alvarez all those years ago. It was a solid victory.
Canelo was a champion with over 40 fights.
Younger than Floyd Mayweather Jr. and bigger than Floyd Mayweather Jr. I never spent too much time on the catch weight employed for the fight because it was Canelo Alvarez's own people that proposed that catch weight after Canelo had beat Kermit Cintrone. I've never diminished Floyd's victory over Canelo Alvarez. There are no excuses for it. The better man won on the night. But the notion that Canelo was in his prime,
No.
and the notion that yesterday's Canelo,
No.
the one that Floyd beat,
No.
that's the same Canelo that's here today at 31 years old?
Yeah, that's a lot of bullshit.
That was 8 years and 16 fights ago.
A lot has happened since then.
A whole lot. He's fought the likes of Arislandi Lara, Miguel Cotto, Liam Smith, Gennady Golovkin 2 times, Daniel Jacobs, Sergey Kovalev, Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant. I mean, a whole lot has happened since then.
It was 8 years and 16 fights ago he fought Floyd.
I don't think for a second that a 23-year-old Canelo Alvarez has anywhere near as much know-how as a 31-year-old Canelo Alvarez has. 8 years and 16 fights later. No, sir. Floyd is entitled to his professional anecdotes. He's entitled to his opinion, the way we all are. And behind closed doors, he can feel that way. He can feel that way out in the open, though if he feels that way out in the open, it's because he's trying to convince other people to feel the way that he feels. And that's why he's still talking about
He
it.
can feel however the fuck he wants.
Behind closed doors or out in the open, though there is a difference between saying something and thinking something, feeling something behind closed doors and putting it out there for everyone to digest and process. When you put it out there for everybody, it's because you're trying to get them to come around to your way of thinking. That's why you're even bothering to broach the subject. Floyd's entitled to his opinion because that's what it is. It's an opinion. Ultimately, we ain't got a time machine to know how today's Canelo Alvarez would fare with yesterday's Floyd Mayweather Jr. Thus, it's all opinions. It's all anecdotal. And Floyd is entitled to his anecdotes, his opinions, the same way we're entitled to ours. And you'll excuse me for saying so, but no. I don't think yesterday's 23-year-old Canelo Alvarez that faced Floyd 8 years ago is the same fighter that today's Canelo Alvarez is. It's ridiculous. And the amount of time that Floyd Mayweather Jr. is spending throwing shade at Canelo Alvarez only accents how big of a glory hog he is. I mean, listen, I think Floyd was an excellent boxer, one of the most excellent boxers I've ever seen. But your time is over.
You stop trying to monopolize all the attention.
Take some of those millions you made and invest it in your promotional outfit. I mean, you're supposed to be a promoter of some kind, right? Mayweather Promotions? Why don't you invest it in your outfit? Hey, why don't you invest it in some opponents for your fighter, Gervonta Davis, that people actually want to see him fight? You're big Floyd Money Mayweather, aren't you? Money's not an issue, not to the money team, not to Mr. Money May himself, Floyd Mayweather Jr. I think it was the 3 Knockdown Rules Steve Kim, the Korean Cassell Steve Kim, who said it best. So, everyone has to prove a certain value to fight Tank, according to Floyd Mayweather and Leonard Ellerby, but when it comes to Canelo, that same standard doesn't exist. It's like he has a certain obligation to face certain fighters who really aren't that valuable.
Oh, so according to Floyd and Lenny, you have to earn a Gervonta Davis fight, but Jermall Charlo and David Benavidez, they don't have to earn a Canelo Alvarez fight.
Well, how does that work? Canelo Alvarez draws more, way more, than Gervonta Davis, and if in Floyd and Lenny's opinion, you have to earn a Gervonta Davis fight based on what he draws, you should certainly have to earn a Canelo Alvarez fight because he draws exponentially more than Davis does.
Give it to me straight, Johnny.
Hey, I'm just giving it to you straight because it's the only way I know how to give it to you. And it seems to me that what this is really about, and what it isn't about. It's not about whether or not Canelo was in his prime when he fought Floyd. It's not about Canelo versus Floyd in a time machine. It's not about any of those things. What it's really about is Floyd Mayweather Jr., Mayweather Promotions, and the PBC being resentful towards Canelo Alvarez because they had hoped that he'd fight few more of their fighters, Jermall Charlo and David Benavidez. That's what they were hoping for, and now they're upset that he's taken the money.
Gone about his business.
That's what this is really all about, and that's why there's been such an active effort in certain quarters of the boxing cosmos, certain factions of fans and certain fighters. That's why they've spent so much time shading Canelo Alvarez ever since he won that last brass ring, collected the last puzzle piece to the super middleweight puzzle. Ever since Canelo...
Look at the criticism and look at who it's coming from.
Let me tell you something about Floyd Mayweather Jr. and the PBC. Floyd was, in fact, excellent boxer. Excellent. He's an excellent boxer, and he's a shit promoter. Shit businessman. You heard that right.
That's right.
You see, the way I look at it, the Mayweather Promotions people and the people at the PBC, Al Heyman, they saw how long it took to make the Manny Pacquiao fight. And you could argue that the fight took too long to make, that it should have happened sooner than later. You could argue that there's blame to be assigned on both sides because the waiting period for that fight was something like 3, 4, 5 fucking years. And, the fight finally came off, and they saw the amount of money they made from the fight due to the hype and the build-up all around it, and they told themselves that they found the blueprint, that they were going to apply this blueprint to their own crop of fighters, those PBC guys.
They tried.
And it didn't work.
It's not working.
They haven't duplicated the success, the financial success of that fight. They haven't duplicated the financial success of Floyd Mayweather Jr. They haven't produced any draws, big draws. I mean, real big draws. The likes of a Floyd Mayweather Jr., the likes of a Canelo Alvarez, hell, the likes of a Miguel Cotto.
It's not working.
Canelo Alvarez is the biggest draw in this country at this point.
And the PBC has yet to produce a real draw of their own.
That could rival a Canelo Alvarez. What are you going to tell me, that Gervonta Davis is on par with Canelo Alvarez? The kid can't even crack 300,000 buys. Not a single one of his pay-per-views have cracked 300,000 buys. Errol Spence Jr., the best numbers he ever did with Mikey Garcia. He's been in a downward spiral since then, hasn't fought at all. This year, some draw he is, right?
Right.
Underneath it all this shade we're seeing thrown at Canelo Alvarez has absolutely nothing to do with his fight against Floyd Mayweather Jr. What it's really about is that these guys need Canelo Alvarez, but he don't need them. They need him to help sell these pay-per-views and help sell these fighters. But Canelo...
What the fuck do you guys got that he needs?
Absolutely nothing. And that's what Floyd and the rest of the PBC guys, that's what they're really upset about. In other news, I'm sure most of you have heard by now that Kazuchika Ioka versus Jerwin Ancajas has now been canceled as Japan is closing borders to foreign visitors to prevent the spread of the Omicron COVID variant. And that's an emphasis on canceled, not postponed. They're not rescheduling. Jerwin Ancajas is going to see about fighting here in America early next year in January, which makes that Kazuchika Ioka fight kaput.
I didn't even get to express my enthusiasm over that fight.
I didn't. It seems as soon as that fight was made official, that's about as long as it took for the fight to end up getting canceled as a result of the Omicron situation. And I've wanted to see Jerwin Ancajas in there with one of or some of the best and brightest fighters at super flyweight, and he was about to do that, but fate...
Cruel mistress.
Sure, you all have heard that the Triple G versus Ryota Murata fight, that's been postponed. Not outright canceled, but still postponed, still affected due to the new COVID restrictions in Japan that prohibit foreign visitors in the wake of the Omicron variant. The middleweight title unification was set for December 29th in Saitama on DAZN. Plan is for the bout to be rescheduled in Japan next year.
So, no Ioka versus Ancajas, no Triple G versus Murata.
I think that Jerwin really needs to reconsider, and I think he really needs to revisit that fight because super flyweights in America, they don't make what they might make abroad, particular to this situation. He can't make here in the United States against anyone what he could be making with Kazuto Ioka in Japan if the fight is rescheduled.
Yeah, Chocolatito and Gallo Estrada probably got some decent prices by way of Matchroom.
But they are both matchroom fighters. Jerwin Ancajas is not.
What the hell are they going to pay him to fight some Joe Blow here in America?
It's unfortunate, to say the least. Triple G, Gennady Golovkin, the reigning IBF middleweight champion, he reacted to the news by saying that I am deeply disappointed that fight in Japan has been postponed, but the health and safety of the public must always be the priority. I look forward to returning to the ring against Ryota Murata as soon as possible. Emphasis on Ryota Murata, because no other fight in the middleweight division, quite like that fight, provides that same financial incentive. There are 130 million reasons why Gennady Golovkin views Ryota Murata as more of a priority than a Jermall Charlo, than a Demetrius Andrade. He could make good money. He could make very good money fighting either one of those guys, but not as much money as he'd make fighting Ryota Murata, who's a star in his country, unlike those two guys. Gennady is 39 years old now. I'm hearing that he'll be 40 in April. Removed from the ring roughly 12 months. He was last in action in December of last year against Kamil Zeremata, a fighter who he petitioned the IBF to qualify as his mandatory challenger and was approved, thereby satisfying his mandatory challenger moving forward without any interruptions that might impede this Ryota Murata fight that they've been planning for some time now. And that took care of him in the year of 2021, but what about the year of 2022? It's been a year since Gennady Golovkin fought. It's been a year since he satisfied a mandatory. Could the IBF get in the way of a Ryota Murata fight moving forward, since Gennady hasn't fought at all this year, hasn't satisfied any mandatories at all this year?
It's definitely something to think about.
Because just like that, he's squandered the entirety of 2021. Ryota Murata was not his only option for a unification match. He could have unified with his platform stablemate, Demetrius Andrade, if he so chose. There was ample time in the year of 2021 between the Kamil Zeremata fight of late last year and now, towards the end of the year, in December. There was plenty of time in there for Triple G to take care of a Demetrius Andrade, for example, in the first or second quarter of the year, rest the third quarter, and prepare to cap off the year with Ryota Murata. He could have done that.
Instead, he wasted the whole year doing nothing.
And I don't expect that he will turn to a Demetrius Andrade for a unification match. I expect that he will wait for the situation to stabilize in Japan so he can move forward with that Ryota Murata fight. I'm not even sure Andrade is available to him at this time, since Demetrius is under orders to face Gennady's countryman, Yanibek Alimkhanuli. As far as Jermall Charlo, I don't view Jermall as a serious option for a Gennady, even if Gennady wanted him, because Jermall's not going to cross over to DAZN, and Gennady, he might very well be still under contract with DAZN, so he's not able to cross over to another platform. He is not a network and promotional free agent.
I don't think he can cross over to Showtime for Charlo.
And I don't think for a second, regardless of what he's offered, that Jermall will cross over to DAZN for him. I never thought that the Ryota Murata fight was a bad fight. I was never against that fight. What I was against was wasting the amount of time that Gennady Golovkin has wasted. What I was against was sitting out most of this year when there's a champion, an unbeaten one, right there, waiting for him. And Gennady chose to sit on his hands.
Kind of blew up in his face, didn't it?
You weren't playing it safe, trying to preserve yourself for Ryota Murata. So you sat out the whole goddamn year just for the whole goddamn fight to get scrapped, just for the whole goddamn fight to get postponed. Now you've lost the last 12 months. You ain't getting any younger.
Karma's got a sense of humor, man.
Well, I understand it. I get it. You place more emphasis on a Ryota Murata fight because you're getting long in the tooth, and this fight pays more than those fights do. I understand it, but that don't change that you're an active reigning champion, and that don't change that your fanboys, they seem to think you can beat Demetrius Andrade.
Yeah, they think you can beat him easy.
So if it were easy, you would have done it. You would have done it, made yourself a couple million. You wouldn't have sat out the whole year. if it were easy.
No, not if it were easy. If it were easy, he would have fought him just as easily as he fought Camille Murata.
And finally, in heavyweight news, former unified heavyweight champion Andy Ruiz's ring return is being eyed for March in Mexico City. Mexican promoter Fernando Beltran of Zanford Promotions revealed the possibility that Ruiz, the first heavyweight champion in the history of Mexican boxing, could fight in the Solaco of Mexico City in March next year. Beltran has already spoken with Ruiz's father, also his legal representative.
Andy was supposed to be returning this month.
But he underwent a knee surgery several months ago, and for this reason, his planned December ring return was delayed. His most recent fight was in May of this year.
You know, that's the only fight he's had since the Joshua fight.
The Joshua rematch, which he lost, that's the only fight he's had in roughly 2 years, and the only fight that he's actually had with Eddie Reynoso in his corner. Fernando Beltran stated, "We already started talks with Andy's father, also with his lawyer. There is an interest, and we will be looking at the possibility of having him make his return in the month of March in the Solaco in Mexico City. We hope to make it happen and provide some good news for the fans," Beltran said to ESPN Deportes. And as far as a marketing strategy, it's actually not a bad one. This really could help to endear Andy Ruiz with those Mexican fans, the Mexican fans and the ones here stateside in America, if he decides to stage a fight south of the border. Outside of a title fight, how else can he hope to garner any positive press?
Been so fucking inactive.
Beltran added, "It would be sensational if in the new morning a new record could be set with thousands of practitioners of this sport that has given Mexico the most glory. And then we can offer a professional boxing show with Andy Ruiz at the helm," Beltran said. And that's the way to play it. You turn it into an event that it's not so much about Andy versus some guy, but an event in it of itself.
I don't imagine it's Wilder he'd be fighting there.
In Mexico City, not for a second. I don't imagine the Bronze Bomber, even after 2 consecutive losses, would give up that kind of leverage to Andy Ruiz. I imagine that the fight will happen, the fight between Andy and Deontay Wilder, provided Andy can stay in the winner's bracket and Deontay can successfully rebound sometime next year, though I don't imagine that's his very next fight, and I really don't imagine he's going to go to Mexico City, of all places, to fight Andy.
If and when they fight, it'll be his stateside.
Sin City almost immediately comes to mind as the potential site for such a fight, Las Vegas, Nevada, and we'll see what happens. Now, it seems that Andy Ruiz's people are going for novelty more than nuance.
More than ambiance.
They want to build an event around Andy.
The question now is, who's the right dance partner?